Welcome back, citizens of Sigistan, to this week's paper review. Now, I didn't even know vibrating foam rollers were a thing, but today's paper is a review of vibrating foam rollers versus normal foam rollers' effect on depth jumps. So let's see how it goes. No innuendos, please. This is serious business again. So this week's paper is titled The Acute Effect of Foam Rolling and Vibration Foam Rolling on Drop Jump Performance. This is coming at us from the Division of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation branch of Kaohsiung Armed Forces General Hospital, Taiwan. Didn't expect that. I wonder if Guo was involved in this. So basically, today's paper wanted to look at the effects of a vibrating foam roller, which is, as you would expect from the name, is just a foam roller that vibrates when you roll on it, essentially, versus a normal foam roller, so just the same foam roller again, that doesn't vibrate, and then a control group. So what we had was 16 Division 1 NCAA volleyball players. All had at least 5 years experience doing strength training plyometric work, so they were fairly well developed athletes. They were clearly talented athletes as well, so we had 16 of them. Essentially what we had was a test on drop jump performance, either control group, so they sat passively for 15 minutes. They did the depth or drop jumps from 40 centimeters, 30 seconds rest between each one, and then they repeated this 3 times. The other groups then, so the same athletes under randomized control across at least 24 hours between testing, they either did 15 minutes foam rolling on the lower limbs, all areas of the lower limb, on either a vibrating foam roller set at 40 beats per minute, whatever that means in regards to vibrating foam rollers, or they then repeated again a separate session on a normal foam roller, so the same foam roller again, keep things consistent. The foam roller wasn't vibrating this time, so this is considered the normal foam rolling. Same again, 15 minutes between each of the drop jumps, and they did again 40 centimeters, 30 seconds rest.
In terms of the results, then there's kind of 2 different groups to the results. First group is looking at those drop jump values, so you have the actual drop jump height, then you have reactive strength index, which I think we've spoken about on here before. Reactive strength index is basically you collect a number of values and you come up with this number. There are multiple tests for this reactive strength index. There's multiple ways of getting to the same value, but it gives you an idea basically for how well people can deal with a kind of stretch shortening cycle. The last one then in that group is ground contact time. So typically athletes with lower ground contact times will be able to jump higher. They're better able to deal with that reactive force of landing. And then the last 3 values we have are hip power, knee power, and ankle power. Right, so drop jump heights. What we see for drop jump heights is just normal foam rolling exercise. FRE is the name of the group. That is significantly better post 2, so just that measuring time afterwards, so 2 minutes afterwards, than control groups were, and then the vibrating foam roller groups were. Next thing then, the RSI. So the score for RSI was better with the traditional foam rollers and with the control group at post 2 and post 5. The value at post 2 was higher than post 5, so there seems to be a kind of a decay of the overall effect. And it's important to note here that so there's discrepancy between vibrating foam rollers and traditional foam rollers at post 5, so 5 minutes afterwards, but the group, like the actual group who was doing the vibrating foam rollers, their pre values before they did the test or before they did any of the exercises were significantly higher. So there appears to be some sort of skewing here in the direction of the vibrating foam rollers that would say maybe it's not a matched sample when it comes to that ground contact time. That could just be due to the skill level or the efficacy level of the actual participants. Have they been doing some sort of rebounding exercise before, or are they just better at the test than the other 2 groups? Right. The next values then are hip, knee, and ankle power values. There's no real difference here. What we see for the foam rolling exercises, there's significant improvements. Like there is a change in the outcomes, but there's no significant difference between foam roller, vibrating foam roller, and the control groups. So although there are improvements, the improvements aren't due to the intervention itself. The last thing I say then on ankle power, there is some discrepancy between the ankle power values, or the effect that vibrating foam rolling has on the ankle, than it will on the hip or the knee. But it just seems a small bit strange that it would just happen in the ankle, not when none of the other muscle groups seem to be reacting positively to it. Is there a reason for that? Who knows? Is it the particular group? Like, I think it might have been volleyball players. Is the particular group, like, is it that cohort are more predisposed to ankle injuries, and therefore a supposed numbing of the ankle joint might help with the vibrational foam roller? But I actually don't know. On to the discussion then, and there's 2 points I want to talk about here. So the first point is that typically when we see foam rolling being used, or in this case vibrating foam rolling being used, we see it being used pre-exercise, so in an almost warm-up capacity. There's a few reasons this is wrong, right? So the reason people often point to these as being good things is that they feel better, they feel more loose, they feel less sore when they're exercising or when they start warming up, if they've done foam roller exercises previously. In a sports performance context, loose is very, very, very rarely better. Being loose might feel better. Having looser hip joints as we're doing a squat might feel more comfortable. But in fact, rigidity around joints or integrity around joints is incredibly important. And especially if we're looking in a power context or a speed context, especially, that rigidity of the ankle, rigidity of the knee, rigidity of the hip is so important. So in our case, if we're looking at an athlete and the athlete is doing a strength training session or a power session or a speed session, the last thing they want to be doing is making themselves like loosey-goosey, right? The last thing they want to do is like take all that tension out of the muscle and really relax everything. Unless you're in a recovery context, or unless you're in a very, very specific sporting context whereby you need to increase range of motion, or you're missing in a range of motion and it's causing biomechanical factors that can't be fixed in another way. Very rarely do we want to make someone much looser prior to training. So where is the application process for, like, why should I apply foam rolling? Well, there are certain cases, right? And I think the biomechanical factors I talked about there's probably 2 or 3 you can think of right now, right? So the first one might be in a front squat or a clean position when you're trying to bring your elbows up. Many of us, particularly if you're a male athlete or if you're an athlete who likes to bench press a lot, many of us are going to have incredibly tight front rack positions. That's a case whereby you really need to loosen things out beforehand. But if you're somebody who's going and doing back squats or deadlifts, and you can kind of get into most of your positions, or by the time you're finished your warm-up, you can hit the position, the last thing you need to be doing is lying on a foam roller, or in this case, lying on a vibrating foam roller and trying to open up that muscle or lengthen those fibers. The second thing then is that, look, it's in our nature to want to go and find novel things, right? It's in our nature to want to strive. Like, we're already striving and training physically and trying to bring about physiological or psychological adaptation to make us better. So why would we not look to do that with our training, and why would we not look to do that with our training apparatus? The world of human physiology is pretty static, right? The training principles that my mother would have learned in her undergrad are very, very similar to the training principles I would have learned in my undergrad. They're very similar to what sport and exercise science students are going to learn in 20 years' time, right? You have some basic principles around adaptation, some basic principles around loading and how to load an athlete, and things don't really change that much. So when new products like this come out, like a vibrating foam roller, or like the vibrating plate that people stand on and supposedly tones their midsection, things don't change that much. It's very, very likely that there won't be major innovation or major changes in the realms of sports training for the next 50 years. So when you see something like a vibrating foam roller coming around, it's not like it's the shark skin wetsuit it's going to allow people to swim way faster, because that's a mechanical adaptation which takes a mechanical factor out of it. It's not like it's the Pro V1 golf ball, which allows people to drive the golf ball further. It's not like it's a different kind of bike or a carbon fiber frame or any of these mechanical changes to sporting equipment. This is a piece of apparatus which is trying to change your physiology, and it's just very, very likely that there's going to be a sudden quick fix method that's going to give you way better results than anything else has given you in the past.
So if we look at why might the normal foam roller have had some kind of positive impact shortly after, within 2 minutes, as opposed to the vibrating foam roller, which didn't have any positive impact or even a slightly negative impact. So if we look at the vibrating foam roller first, the reason it probably had a negative impact would be that it is probably a slightly fatiguing stimulus. So you are probably causing some kind of fatigue on those muscles when you are applying it for 15 minutes of vibration. So it might be a very minor form of muscular contraction, maybe. So over the course of 15 minutes, pretty intense. And from what they were saying, the 40 beats per minute or whatever is a slightly higher vibration frequency that's normally done on vibrating foam rollers. So it's possible that it just slightly fatigued them before the jump, so they had some kind of pre-fatigue before they went to the depth jump, and then they just had slightly lower results. Not much, but enough that it was statistically significant. And then why might the normal foam roller then have had a short period of kind of improved performance, slightly improved performance, but again statistically significant? It could be due to maybe a reduction in antagonist coactivation. So you've heard us talk about this a couple of times before, but essentially when you're performing any kind of strength or power endeavor, the opposing muscle to the one performing the primary movement that you're doing applies a resisting force due to your body's inherent kind of need to decelerate and protect itself from certain movements. And as you get more proficient at strength training or whatever it is the sport you're doing, this resistance force from the opposing muscle decreases over time. So it could be that the foam rolling before that section for a very short period of time may have inhibited or maybe freed up, for example, the opposing or the reactive muscle essentially, and allowed for a better performance of the primary movement of the muscles that were being used for the depth jump. That might be a bit of a stretch, but it might be one of the reasons. Again, it then returns to normal after 5 minutes, so 3 minutes later, so very, very short term. So again, in the conclusion of this, they kind of recommend that before any strength or any kind of power endeavors, that people would foam roller in the 2 minutes before that endeavor. Like Fitz said, and I probably wouldn't necessarily agree with that. If we look at this similar to the PAP studies we've done before, the post-potentiation activation, so some of these do give you a very reliable and a tangible benefit to your training endeavor. So whether it be jumping or sprinting, depending on what method you go about using your PAP. But again, like the PAP study, this foam rolling thing, it may be that there's not conclusive evidence that long-term use of this in your training will provide meaningful long-term benefit. It could be that the short-term improvement in performance is it's just short-term, and then the kind of little bump up in performance you get will increase any more exponentially than it would be if you train normally without this new method. So I would bet, and again, until we see, and again, it's probably maybe it might be too early to say, but until we see some kind of longitudinal PAP studies or a longitudinal foam roller study like this, that training benefit is short-lived, and then it's kind of normalized after a period of time. It's incorporated into the system, your body adapts to that new stimulus, and then you proceed as normal through your training block, which is what I bet would probably happen. I don't think that you would see a permanent benefit from a long-term use of this in your training. Again, it's something noteworthy. It is novel, and it is pretty cool to see that it had some effects, but again, only for 2 minutes post foam rolling. So it's probably not feasible for anyone doing in their actual sport endeavor. And again, it's just for a power movement. So it would be interesting to see if something similar happened with strength training, or would we see the opposite effect. So it remains to be seen. Again, so thanks for watching. So don't forget to seekstrength.com. If any of you are weightlifters, we have our new return to weightlifting program out. So it's just one block. If you've done a program before, you know what that means. So 4 weeks, it's everything you need to do to return to weightlifting. So just get you back into shape then to proceed to either maybe our beginner program or get onto our normal weightlifting program. For any other consultations or one-to-one coaching, just go to seekstrength.com and contact us there. Thanks for watching. Appreciate all the views, likes, comments, etc.